Hello, my name is Isabella. I'm a tarot reader and tarot writer. I write a zine called Boudoir Tarot, and I'm also available for private readings. But today I'm here to do a little collective pull. So if you found this, congratulations. Here's your free reading, free 2-card reading. And the 2 cards that I pulled, I'm very excited to talk about today. I've pulled them together many times. So I've kind of had a lot of preparation of thinking about what these 2 cards mean together, to the point that I'm a little overwhelmed on where to start. But let's introduce them. We've got the Chariot and we've got the 7 of Wands. And right off the bat, these cards kind of seem both complementary and contradictory. And I think that comes down a lot to the nature of the Chariot. Usually when people come into contact with the Chariot, it goes one of 2 ways in terms of how they perceive it. There's the pathway of the Chariot where he's like this very martial figure, like a warrior. I think it's in like it's like the Aquarian tarot. I think he's like literally like gladiator down, warrior type shit. But the other pathway of the Chariot kind of leans in more so to its Cancerian attributions, and paint it kind of as this watery element. It's almost like that boat going over the water. And in that sense, we find a lot of associations of the Chariot where it has to do with things that are very intuitive and creative and maybe even like traditionally feminine, whether it's dreams or psychoanalysis. This is a big card of psychoanalysis to me, especially like in the sense of moving forward in your life after working through a block. This card also has a lot to do with creativity to me, particularly through this sort of Cancerian path. And particularly I say creativity with this card because it is the principle in tarot of movement. And both movement in the literal sense of like the wheels turning, he's traveling somewhere, but also movement like the ways I'm describing, whether it's like psychological progression, dreams, you travel to another realm, or when you do the creative act, you travel into your own sort of like subconscious waters and learn how to bring something back. There's also so many artists who channeling is a big part of their work, and a lot more than just artists who are purely spiritual or things like that. A lot of creative people kind of talk about when that sort of moment hits. It feels like it's like coming outside of yourself and you're just like the vessel. And that's something very appropriate with, like I said, the Cancerian attributions of the Chariot, because we think about the crab as like this shell, protecting this like soft inside. Or I sometimes think of this card as like a literal chariot. Like if anyone's seen the beginning of Sofia Coppola's Marie Antoinette, she's like making this journey in like a old school like clippity cloppity, I guess that's a carriage, but it's this idea of like this traveling vehicle, this technological vehicle that's able to carry inside something more like sensitive and needs to be protective, or just isn't capable of making that journey on their own. And it's funny to connect that to what I originally said about the initial sort of way of the Chariot being this very like warrior-like figure. And we'll get into Mars in a second, but we think of Mars in astrology as kind of like the warrior. They followed the directions of the king. And it's that kind of energy that I feel in the Chariot, where it can't necessarily move without direction, right? It needs to have some sort of guiding force or instruction to take it from point A to point B in a way that's very warrior-like, right? Like a warrior is not, unless you're like I don't know, I can't think of a lot of examples where like a true warrior is out there just like completely on his own, right? There's always some sort of larger mission or goal. Even if you're like a spiritual warrior, which I feel like this is a big part of, you're still kind of having that, like a Joan of Arc, yeah, like she's receiving these messages from the angels who guide her on her path. But as I'm thinking of like, oh, when do you see a warrior like on his own? We can think of like all the chivalric knight tales of, like King Arthur and stuff like that. And that is a theme that comes up in tarot just in general a lot. But I think the Chariot card especially is like the true embodiment of that sort of chivalric knight energy. And in those stories, we see like there's a home base, King Arthur's castle. Where honestly, I have really not. I saw the Green Man movie, and I kind of know about it from like pop culture. Never really read one, but in my head, they all start out at this home base of like the castle, right? And then they all go out on their respective journeys, and kind of with the intention of you're carrying the message of the king, you're carrying the message of the kingdom, and you have this larger goal. Like those stories interact a lot or intertwine a lot with like the courtly love tradition. I do know that, which also feels very Chariot-like to me. And, they're doing their journeys with the holding in their heart and their mind, like, oh, I'm going to return to my lady love and I'm going to be valiant or victorious. And with that, I'm going to segue into our supporting card, which is Valor, 7 of Wands, which to me is also like a very knightly, chivalrous type of energy. And it's like when the knight goes out on his journeying, he requires this type of strength in order to continue on the journey and execute it to completion, right? Like to do his true will. And this card is different than like what we think of in tarot as like someone coming in with a big stick. Even though we kind of do see this on the card, it's more than just a big stick, right? Like this is not dominion. This is of the 2 of Wands. This is not the oppression of the 10 of Wands. This is valor, right? This is like the key quality of the knights that we've been talking about, right? Where you have this kind of, it's sort of, when I think of the word valor, it's a mix of being courageous and like willing to kind of, I don't want to necessarily say sacrifice yourself, but put your own immediate needs, wants, desires, whatever, in the back in order to do something for the greater good. And that willingness to kind of follow the greater good is kind of like a pure-heartedness that I think takes it from courage into valor. Valor is like, to me, way more grounded in like doing what's not even necessarily right, but doing what's good, right? Like what not only will sort of solve the problem, but will also be like make something fruitful or cause like real change to happen because of it. And it's kind of funny too, like interacting with the Chariot, because I feel like valor is also sort of like this energy where like you have the perfect vessel, like you have this knight that's been trained and is strong, and he's either like got the gusto of going out on his first journey, or he's knowledgeable and seasoned from doing it before. But then there's moments where that valor kind of like gets, that's why they call it like getting knighted, right? Like that energy is kind of like a form of grace, right? That descends on you. And you're able to kind of do these maybe more difficult actions with a level of grace and a level of beauty and a level of like surrender, I guess. Surrender to what's good in life, and also kind of finding peace with the fact that like if you're doing something good, that's great. I don't know if that's a great way to phrase it, right? But like so much of life we spend doing nothing, like at best. Other times we're just like creating waste or like stress or chaos, either for ourselves or other people, or like I already said, like just doing straight up nothing, like scrolling. But valor is kind of, and the Seven of Wands with that, is like this sort of moment where you rise up and you're sort of being the greatest version of yourself. You're doing what Aleister Crowley talks about in following your true will, right? Which is truly the vibe of the chariot, right? Like this is someone who's on that track. They're in the chariot, you know, they're on the journey. There's a reason, like, it's such a cliche to talk about the spiritual journey, quote unquote. Like when I was a religious studies undergrad, like my teacher kind of was like, we would write a lot of like personal essays, and like the one thing my teacher would be is like, don't talk about, don't like, avoid the words like my spiritual journey, right? Because it's such a cliche, and in that sense it's like so universal, but also like there's so many more complex ways that we can say it. And the spiritual journey in and of itself is so complex and so highly individualistic, and I feel like that's very chariot-like as well, because it's sort of how your subconscious and your imagination influence and shape like not only your experience of the world and like the path you travel down in life, but also like, you know, so many religious practices are about learning how to like identify these core influences or these core beliefs, these things that, you know, like when you find them, it feels like, oh my God, I've been incarnated to love this thing, to do this thing, to fight for this thing, etc. And the chariot's about sort of like going in within yourself, accessing those things, and then using that as the blueprint to go forward. And the Seven of Wands talks about like on this journey, we're going to come across temptations to leave the path. We're going to come across moments where we have to declare ourselves as like a servant of the path. We have to fight for the path. And oftentimes like come across challenges, right? But like those challenges, like the chivalric knight on his journey, like make up the journey, right? Like that's what the stories are about. Like the stories are not about them like, oh my God, like I saw a beautiful weeping willow tree and there were absolutely no spirits living in it or under it. Like a little bird just tweeted at me and it was beautiful. I loved it. Like that's great. But also like the stories in the King Arthur saga that have been passed down and reinterpreted and made meaningful for hundreds of years are the ones in which they come across obstacles, difficulties, and are forced to rise up to the occasion and meet them. And I think in the Green Man, like the big climax is basically up to him choosing whether or not he's going to run away from his destiny, essentially, even though it's challenging and scary, or if he's gonna like rise up and meet his destiny and then become the knight that, you know, we think of when we think of like an Arthurian knight. Someone who's strong and but also like sensitive. I mean, I think the reality of these knights is like they were probably like pretty freaking scary, but also at the same time, like we have stories of like Lancelot, who was like just doing it all for love, you know? And it's just like that level of care and commitment to the cause and like true love, like finding your true love in the cause or in the fight or in the struggle. And tarot talks about that kind of thing all the time. So there's so much more to be said about these two cards. Like I said, I've pulled these for myself together, I think at least three times in like pretty big, important readings. So my pleasure, as always, to talk about them. I hope I did it justice. Like I said, so much more to be said. If you're interested in hearing me talk about tarot more, like I said, I have a tarot zine called Boudoir Tarot, which is like a sort of like an essay version of a Celtic cross spread. And I'm also available for private readings. I can do a little video like this, a voice note. I can even make you like a custom zine. This is my zine, by the way. This is Boudoir Tarot, all illustrated. And I can make you like a custom little zine like this with a 3-card reading. So my contact info will be in the description if you're interested in that. Other than that, thanks for watching. I hope it helped or was entertaining. Bye!